Pelicans fans, welcome back to the channel. Glad to have you here stopping by for a New Orleans Pelicans offseason preview. This video has been quite requested on the channel. You'll see some of those comments flashing on the screen now, and I'm very excited to be talking some New Orleans basketball, a really passionate fan base and a really strong fan base in my opinion. Even though this team hasn't had the most postseason success in the last decade or so, there's still, I think, a good amount of support behind this team, which kind of gets me into the first question I want to ask. I don't really know a lot of Pelicans fans in real life, so you guys are kind of my testament to how you feel about this. The Pelicans, when they rebranded to the Pelicans, there was some kind of feedback and maybe some negative thoughts about the new logo, the new branding being the Pelicans. I want to know what your thoughts are on the team name actually being the Pelicans. When I was showing my girlfriend this video, she said, "Is their name really the Pelicans?" And I said, "Yep, that's their name." So hopefully you guys do enjoy this video. If you do, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. And I just wanted to ask your guys' opinion on that, because I'm always curious how the fan base actually feels about certain things about the team. And that was one of the questions that popped into my head for today. So jumping into a video preview here now, just like we do in all of these offseason previews, we take the team where they're currently at and look to build forward with it. So it's really important to recap this past season, what I noticed from the team, some of the key important stretches of basketball that this team had, and just kind of evaluating where the roster currently sits, what they need to add, what they can cut off of their roster. So that's really the important steps of an organization. That's what most people in the front office are consistently doing with their whiteboards. They got a whole bunch of plans pretty much drawn up and for the most part well thought out. I can't say the same thing about every GM and executive, but for the most part I think a lot of them are operating that way. Then we'll look at the 2023 NBA draft, both the Pelicans lottery odds, which if that came into effect, holy cow, the Pelicans could be loaded. And then we'll also consider some NBA draft targets for them at their projected pick. We'll also talk about some of those top 4 guys if they were to move up, but realistically, I think our efforts are best spent with where they're likely to pick. We'll then continue that up with some NBA free agency discussion, both the Pelicans cap space and some of the guys that they have cap holds on, and what they could look to do with those players, and then also their free agency targets. Are the Pelicans going to be active or not? And my guess is likely a little bit less so, which is why we're going to talk about the trade block as well. Some of the players that the Pelicans could gear up for and try and go make a big splash move to add to their current core, which I think there's some pretty good options there towards the end of the video. So you're going to want to stick around for that. And then we'll finalize with an early outlook where we look at, hey, this is where the team's at. I think that these moves are plausible and this is where they could potentially get to by next season. And let's start by recapping last year, where we look at what this team was. 42-40, so they had a winning record. They finished 9th in the Western Conference, and they lost in the play-in game as the 9 seed to the Oklahoma City Thunder, who were the 10 seed, beat them at Smoothie King Center. And you think, sounds like a disappointment, right? 9th in the West and pretty much not making the playoffs. I know they had a postseason berth technically, but not really a playoff team. It just doesn't feel good for how much talent this team has and just how good of a roster they have in general, especially with how the season started. Remember, by the beginning of the new year, this team was in the top 2 in the Western Conference. At one point, they were the 1 seed in the West pretty convincingly. A lot of people were trying to buy some of the stock on New Orleans preseason. I had actually slotted this team to finish 8th in the Western Conference. I was off by 1 seed. And I think that, a lot of people were surprised when I had them 8th. And trust me, I believe in this talent big time. But I think some of the reasons why I was a little skeptical of this team putting it all together this quickly and this soon was, one, last year they had won 36 games. They make a 6-win improvement this year, which is sizable, honestly. But I just saw some of the issues in terms of health and being able to stay on the court. And that's really what doomed this Pelican season, which I feel really bad to say because this team is loaded with talent. And I am a big believer in the roster that is assembled here in New Orleans. I think David Griffin took some really massive risks while building this team. I think the CJ McCollum trade is probably the biggest risk of all of them. And I think at one point he was really on the hot seat. And honestly, I think he was probably 2-3 months away from being fired before making that McCollum trade that panned out so well for him and honestly saved his job with New Orleans, in my opinion. And because of that, he's now got a pretty firm grip in his position. I think he's starting to build this team the right way, which I'm very happy to see. I didn't dislike the hire when they hired him. I thought he was a pretty good candidate, but things just had not panned out super well post Anthony Davis. But you have to look at the way he's navigated that, the way he's able to bring in CJ McCollum as well. and make a few other moves on the margins to add to that. For the most part, his track record is pretty good. There's some mistakes in there. I don't think anyone would defend the Devontae Graham contract or trading a first-round pick to get him. But, there's elements like that for every GM, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. And I do think that one really important thing to note, at one point this year, the Pelicans had a 10-game losing streak, which that's really tough to stomach, especially when you finish 42-40 and there's just a 10-game dead spot in the middle of your schedule where you just could not win a game. You think about that, even if they go 5-5 in that 10-game stretch, which is not asking that much, that's about what they were for the season in terms of being around 500, they would finish 47-35, which is one game back of the third seed Sacramento Kings. That 10-game stretch was honestly so damaging to not only the Pelicans' playoff seeding and positioning, but just the overall season and how we're going to look back on it, because this team was really, really good for a majority of the year. And if you have to look for a positive, it's the fact that if the Pelicans at some point, sometime can actually stay healthy, and I'm looking past Zion Williamson, I'm talking about Brandon Ingram being able to stay in the lineup, CJ McCollum being able to stay in the lineup, and just building some continuity and consistency, we're going to see this team take a massive step forward at some point. And I really believe in the young talent. I think Brandon Ingram, one of the more underrated players in the league. I think he's a professional bucket getter who he showed it again this year. And I think every single year too, he's taking steps forward as a playmaker. I think his consistency as a decision maker has been significantly better. He is not going to be your number one assist guy or anything like that, but just being able to make the right pass at the right time, especially out of double teams, has been so important for Ingram's development. And I've seen him take huge strides there for New Orleans. Now, is he still perfect at it? No, but he's gotten so much better than where he was when he first entered the league. It's also important to note, just physically, he's in much better shape in terms of his actual strength, ability to play through contact. And we know when he gets to some of those spots on the court that he loves, he's just so potent there that it's almost seeming like he never misses. Which, if you're looking at this team's long-term picture, Brandon Ingram, to me, is a massive, massive upside player for them. And because of that, I'm really glad that he did not end up getting traded to Brooklyn for Kevin Durant. I think that would have been a really bad turning of the tide here for New Orleans, just given the age discrepancy between KD and Zion. Yes, Kevin Durant probably would have made the team better this year, next year, a couple years. But long-term, I think Ingram-Zion is the pairing you want, because Zion, more of a downhill kind of freight truck coming down the lane. Obviously, nobody can stop him from getting to his left hand, even though every scouting report says force him right, force him right. He's just so physically overpowering and outmatching everybody that it doesn't matter, because he knows, hey, if I take one dribble right here, they have to overcompensate for my athleticism, and I can spin back left or Euro back left, or I could just freight train a guy and get through him and get to the left hand. And Zion, I'm just hoping we see him stay healthy, because, and I'm sure Pelicans fans, you are as well, because this guy is just so good. He's honestly one of the most talented players in the league. And everyone likes to say, oh, well, slashing is not as talent-based as, say, shooting like Steph Curry. And obviously there's an understanding of oh, well, the further range shot's more skilled. There's a way that Zion has to get to the rim. And that's really the skilled element part of that, is teams know he wants to get there, and he still does. And that's what makes it very impressive. CJ McCollum, I do think, is a good fit next to Ingram and Zion. I think we've seen the successes of that. But at the same time, I'm not saying I don't like CJ McCollum or anything. I think CJ McCollum's, first of all, a very smart person. His podcast is phenomenal. I've only listened to one episode of it, but it was very entertaining. I typically don't listen to other podcasts or anything like that very much. I like to have some of my own insight, but I think listening to a player like CJ McCollum while he's in the league is very entertaining and interesting. So kind of a shout out to him. I usually don't shout out other podcasts or platforms like that, but CJ McCollum, I think, very interesting to listen to. And I also think that just with New Orleans in general, he's been like a steady force for them. I know he's dealing with some injury stuff this year too, so not necessarily with always being on the court, but just like a veteran in the locker room. And I've always been an advocate for having veteran leadership, and everyone likes to think of the 13th guy on the team who sits on the end of the bench and cheers everybody on. I think having good veterans who really play, even if they're not the best player on the team, but just are out there and have an impact on winning and really establish a good culture and camaraderie around the guys, and just also the fact and the likelihood that you're going to be in more competitive games when you have veteran players on your roster. I think it's been really good for the development of Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson in the short time CJ has been on the court with those guys in New Orleans. I do think it's interesting to note that we barely have seen Ingram, Zion, and CJ all play together. And the reason for that obviously has been those injuries. Zion missed the most amount of time, but Ingram also missed a very good amount. And then CJ too. It's just we haven't really seen the three of them together, which is when the Pelicans are going to be at full strength. I think they're going to be really, really scary. Valanciunas was a really, really nice big for them this year too. I think he's like a really calming presence for them to have, and I think he's honestly at times underutilized. Willie Green, it's like a tough switch to find because you have all of this perimeter talent, but you also just have a big who can sometimes outpower, outmuscle guys, and he's also very skilled inside with his little jump hook that he's got. And he's got a really nice drop step too. I don't want to sell Valanciunas short. Like, do I think Valanciunas is like a championship caliber center? Probably not, but those are really hard to find anyway. So if you're looking for like a big who's going to help you a lot during the regular season and have nice playoff moments, who's going to match up well with certain bigs in the postseason, Valanciunas is what you're looking for, especially as kind of like an ancillary piece, which is what he is on this team. And I think Willie Green's just got to, find the right level of, hey, this game we need Valanciunas more. We got to feed him more post touches. We got to get him more involved. And then there's games where you have to realize, like, hey, this isn't really our advantage, and we don't need to go to Valanciunas as much. And I think Willie Green, a very young head coach, someone who's not been a head coach in the league for very long, is still learning that a little bit. And I don't think there's any issue with that, because for the most part, I think Willie Green's done a solid job as the Pelicans head coach. I don't think he's this fantastic, like, top 5 coach in the league or anything, but I think he's a solid coach, and he's not really the reason why the Pelicans missed the playoffs this year. Now, I do think not winning a game through the duration of a 10-game stretch is pretty tough, and that's going to fall on his shoulders a lot. But for the most part, given with where they were and where they've gotten to, I'd have to say he's done a pretty decent job. And then I want to highlight their wing position. They've got a lot of guys that I really like on the wings. Trey Murphy, Herb Jones are, of course, the two that draw the most attention from national media, and deservedly so. Herb Jones, one of the better defensive players in the league. Probably if you're doing a draft of like, hey, we need one stop, who do I want on the ball? Herb Jones is probably a top 5, top 6 pick in that type of draft. There's a lot of other players around the league. Jaden McDaniels from Minnesota comes to mind. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard, when he's still engaged and locked in, is in that category. But having a guy in that realm is just so important come postseason time. We saw how impactful Herb can be. And then you, in addition to that, have guys like Trey Murphy, who I love Trey Murphy's game. He took a big step forward this year for New Orleans. And honestly, he's going to be a big part of their future. At some point, I think New Orleans is going to lean into this kind of 4-wing, 1-guard type lineups, where you're going to see like a CJ, Zion, Ingram, Herb, and Trey Murphy on the floor all together. That's your 5-man lineup. You have enough length and size and athleticism to probably get away with it. You have the physicality with Zion, and you can probably use Zion in different ways that maybe let him be more of a rim protector and be a shot blocker, which I think would be good, while also utilizing Murphy and Jones as their kind of like athletic, lengthy counterparts on the wings to defend ball handlers and the other team's best players. I think that's something that they can really look into and explore quite a bit more than they have. Of course, the first step of that is those big 3 guys being healthy and on the court at the same time. But I think Willie Green down the road is going to have a lot of fun with some of those matchups, some of those lineups. But I do want to make sure I talk about Larry Nance as well, who's been a big part of their team defense. His switch ability, his ability to play at the level of the screen. He's a definitely different style big than Jonas Valanciunas in terms of the defensive side of the court. And also offensively, you're not going to feed him a bunch of post touches, but athletically, he's obviously, former dunk contest participant, somebody who his dad was in it. He's just got a long line of athleticism that he comes from. And because of that, it gives the Pelicans a really nice option to play really good, meaningful minutes. Like, honestly, at the end of games, I trust Nance just as much as I do Valanciunas on the floor. And that's a really big plus that most teams don't have. Backup center is probably one of the thinnest positions in the NBA, if not the thinnest, just because there's really a lack of skilled size in the league. And I'm talking about 6'11", 7-footers. There's just not a lot of guys out there that you trust outside of maybe the top 15 bigs in the league. So having 2 guys that I trust on the floor at the end of games is a huge advantage other teams do not have currently. So going forward here into their draft lottery odds, and this is where a lot of people are going to have interest in what New Orleans could potentially look to do. They sit at the very bottom of the lottery odds, but that's not terrible. You'd rather be at the bottom of the lottery odds than not in them at all, because at least there's a tiny minuscule chance that they move up for Victor Wembanyama And I'm just going to say this now. The only reason I'm really talking about the number one pick, it's not very likely, less than a 1% chance for them to land Victor Wembanyama on draft lottery night, which is May 16th. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because if they were to get Victor Wembanyama, the league would actually be screwed. The league would be in so much trouble because the Pelicans, and I said the same thing about the Oklahoma City Thunder, they've got so much young talent. They've got the premium positions you're looking for, a lot of wings, a lot of length, size, skilled size, like I've mentioned. And then you add in probably the most skilled size we've maybe ever seen in the league at 7'4", a perimeter shooter who can be a fantastic defender, both out on the perimeter. I think just around the rim, he's going to be so overwhelming to people. Think about Rudy Gobert at 7'1", 7'2" ish. His absolute length and size has been a real deterrent for teams in the past, and you make him quite a bit taller, give him a bigger wingspan, make him a little bit more vertically athletic, and that's what you're getting with Victor Wembanyama, who I think is going to be one of the best rim deterrents we've seen in the NBA. I'm telling you, his rookie season, he's going to have some block where he's on the opposite side of the rim, and he's just going to somehow pin a shot on the other side, which is like inhuman, which is why LeBron James called him an alien. If New Orleans got him, it's game over for the league, because Zion, Victor Wembanyama, two of the most freakishly athletic guys in the league in completely different ways. It would just break the league. Plus, they have the talent and the shot making with Ingram and CJ. They have also got some other defensive guys, Jose Alvarado, who I should have mentioned during the season recap. Really nice player, obviously missed some time as well, but trust Alvarado's game quite a bit. I also, like I mentioned, all the guys I like. I like New Orleans roster a lot. They've got a lot of good players, and if they added Victor, it would be game over. I think also if they add Scoot, it's game over, because it gives them kind of that true point guard. I know they're for some reason people are labeling Scoot as a combo guard. Like, I don't know how many years in a row we have to see this where the G League Ignite coaching has just been really, really poor. There's no scheme or setup, and obviously a lot of practice time is devoted to skill development and more so things of that nature. And as a coach myself, I understand how this works, that you can either coach scheme or you can coach skill development. And it's very hard with limited practice time, especially when you're traveling on the road like the G League is for a long duration of a season. It's hard to really nail both. It's hard to get your scheme down and build something that's going to show a lot of success versus working on stuff that's going to build good long-term players. And of course, the Ignite program is all about development and getting guys ready for the actual NBA. So that's the route that they've taken. But because of that, we've seen really, really bad in-season performances by some of these prospects that caused them to fall. I think a great example of that is Jaden Hardy, and people thought, oh, well, look at his efficiencies, he's terrible. And then he gets drafted by the Mavericks, plays for the Texas Legends in the exact same league, in the G League that he was just playing in, and has a phenomenal G League season and actually earned himself NBA minutes by the end of the year despite being a second-round pick. Like, there's guys like that all the time across multiple different platforms, like guys who come from college also just sometimes they're not in the right system. They move to a different system or a better scheme for them, and it just works. Scoot Henderson, like, I think he was really limited because he was a player who I didn't think needed skill development. I think he needed good structure and a good scheme around him to let him shine. They didn't really let him do that as much. So because of that, he had some issues, also missed some time with a facial fracture and just didn't have quite the season he was hoping for. So the buzz has cooled off on him quite a bit. He would be fantastic. He's not a combo guard. He's a point guard with combo guard skills when it comes to scoring the ball. And if you haven't noticed, in today's NBA, your point guard better be able to score. Otherwise, they end up like Ben Simmons, where people just call him unplayable. I don't even agree with that myself, but you want your point guard to be able to score. Scoot Henderson can very much so score the ball. Brandon Miller would feel like, I mean, I don't even know what you do with that. One more wing, why not? And then you also look at Amen Thompson. He'd be like a really fun, like, upside pick. I know they took a guard with similar size last year with Dyson Daniels, but Amen Thompson just so much more athletic, so much more of a rim force, and just a better ball handler than Dyson Daniels. I look at Daniels more as like a wing than a point guard anyway. I know he's got good point guard type skills when it comes to passing decision making. I think he's a really good connector, but I don't think he's ever going to play true point guard in the NBA. I think he'll probably play more like a Nick Batum type of role, which it sounds like I'm bashing him. I'm not. I just think that, his role is less like on the ball and running a bunch of pick and rolls every game, and more so being like a cutter diver who catches the ball and then all of a sudden flings a pass over to the corner that nobody else saw, because that's what his skill set is, which is why I was a little bit lower on him in my pre-draft process last year. But I still think New Orleans is just loaded with talent that we didn't even have to really see Dyson Daniels this year that much. And he's also going to develop into a great perimeter defender who's going to be really impactful. New Orleans is just loaded. That's really the main note here. New Orleans is loaded. If they get a top 4 pick, they're going to be even more loaded. Probably would look to even use it as a trade chip, which we'll talk about later. So if they do stay at 14, here are some draft targets I like for them. And this list is going to be rather interesting. I want to start with Derek Lively, the second out of Duke. A lot of people seem to be lower on him than I am and his projected draft range. For me, I'm actually really intrigued with Derek Lively because he's 7'1". He's got really good deterrent skills, like we've talked about with Victor Wembanyama to a lesser extent. But he had some monster games for Duke, including an 8-block performance during the season that was really, probably his best game of the year. He's also a very, very good dunker spot sitter, and I know that doesn't sound like a great skill to have, like, oh cool, he can stand around the rim and dunk. Sometimes there's big men who can't really do that very well. He's a good 2-foot jumper. He's got good timing on lobs. He's got a really wide catch radius too. Almost think about it as a wide receiver. And New Orleans fans, it well with like a guy like Chris Olave, how elite of a receiver he's become already early in his career. Derek Lively, he's going to be a great pass catcher around the rim, which is very, very important. He also understands his role, so he's not going to get in there and try and be like this post-up offensive machine. He's going to play like Larry Nance, but he's a better rim protector than Larry Nance. Maybe not quite as laterally quick, but he's still pretty quick for his size, which at 7'1", it's a really big plus if you have some lateral quickness to him, and he definitely does. And the thing is, New Orleans doesn't need a center right now, but the reason you take him is you give him a couple years to develop. You don't have to rush him into minutes or anything, which is one of the beauties of New Orleans right now is there's good infrastructure around these guys. There's good structure around them just in general. And because of that, they get to thrive when they play because they're not asked to do too much. They're not asked to play outside of a role, which, helps the general perception on them and helps them build some confidence as they perform. But also outside of that, they're just, given time to progress as players, fill out their frames, learn the system, learn the scheme, and they're not just thrown out there on night one and say, okay, well, go good luck and go try. Like, it's just New Orleans is in a really good spot because of that. Two players who I really, really like for them, Grady Dick and Jordan Hawkins, both of them premier shooters in this draft. I prefer Grady Dick because he's quite a bit bigger than Jordan Hawkins. Pause. But Grady Dick for me is a player who at 6'8", really good shooting touch, not only from the three-point line, which is really going to be his number one skill. That's what's going to be highlighted during the NBA draft. You're going to hear Jay Bilas say, well, this kid can really shoot. That's probably going to be the first sentence out of his mouth, and deservedly so. But he can also put the ball on the deck, get to spots on the floor, and score from there. He's a fantastic offensive rebounder, something that I think is a very underrated trait, especially for a shooter, because you think about someone like Grady Dick, who's going to be running around on the perimeter. His matchup's going to get exhausted just running with him off of stagger screens and flares, all of the different fun things you can do with a guy, dribble handoffs. And then all of a sudden a shot goes up and, well, Grady Dick's guy's going to think, okay, I can finally relax. Nope, because Grady's going to be crashing the boards and throwing down some putback dunks, even though he doesn't look like a guy that would do that, if you catch my drift. And he's also somebody who I just think he's really smart as a player. I think he's going to make the right play a lot of the time. He doesn't force a lot of bad shots. He plays within himself. He plays within a role, but he knows he's capable of doing more. He's got really good touch on drives. And I think athletically, there's more there than you would expect. Hawkins, for me, he had a fantastic March. He played himself into lottery consideration. I don't have a lottery grade on him, though. He's really not good around the rim. Shot significantly worse inside the two-point arc than he did than a guy like Grady Dick. And Jordan Hawkins very reliant on his perimeter shot going in. Now, that's not a bad thing, especially for a team like New Orleans, which is why I think that they would consider him here. Remember, they don't need Jordan Hawkins to be some type of star. They don't need him to be an inside-the-arc scorer when you have Zion, Ingram, CJ, and the infrastructure like Valanciunas at center around him. You need Hawkins to run off screens and knock down shots. At the trade deadline, I thought that Malik Beasley would have been a realistic trade candidate for them because of his movement shooting capability. I think Jordan Hawkins plays himself into a similar Malik Beasley type role where he's going to be a high volume, high variance three-point shooter, which is going to be valuable. I mean, we've seen Malik Beasley make a lot of money in his career. He's going to continue to make a lot of money moving forward. And Hawkins, if you get that out of him at pick 14 or a little bit later in the draft, it's a home run because it's somebody who's going to stick in the league and have a really nice high impact for a long time, which is why I think they would consider him, especially since I believe Grady Dick will likely be off the board before number 14 of the draft. Keontae George, Jalen Hood-Schifino, you could also throw in Kobe Buffkin here. from Michigan. I like those three guards. My preference out of the three of them as of right now, specifically for New Orleans, probably would actually be Kobe Buffkin, whose name I don't have on the graphic, which I should be. I should just put it on there, but I didn't. Kobe Buffkin is a really nice connector. I think he would make some sense. He's also a good perimeter shot maker, has some downhill capabilities to him too. Kind of a surprising defensive player, only at about 6'4", averaged nearly a block a game for Michigan this year. So Buffkin, I wouldn't rule out. Keontae George, Jalen Hood-Schifino, different players. Hood-Schifino a little bit bigger, kind of fits what David Griffin has drafted, which is why I think JHS would get a lot of consideration here as a bigger guard, kind of similar to Dyson Daniels, honestly, but I think more of a true point guard with his ability to really handle the ball, run a bunch of pick and rolls in a game, and he's got a really nice mid-range jump shot, which would be his main go-to option. Keontae George, I think, had a pretty bad year at Baylor, honestly. Shot under 40% from the field, about 33% from three. So not a great season for him, but still, if you just watch him and you watch the games, you just know, like, his ability to create separation. He's pretty electric downhill. He's got all the traits you're looking for a guard. It's just about, does he develop? Does he take some of those steps forward? And for New Orleans, again, you're not rushing any of these guys, which is why a stab at Keontae George still makes some sense in my eyes. If they're looking for like a long-term, who could be our CJ post McCollum era, Keontae George, KJ probably would, or KG, excuse me, would probably become their CJ answer, which is kind of funny, obviously not Kevin Garnett. Moving forward to our NBA free agency situation, the Pelicans are negative $16.7 million in cap space, but they do have the non-taxpayer mid-level exception available to them at $12.221 million. They also would have the biannual exception available to them at $4.448 million, which would hard cap them if they were to use that, which to me makes me believe that they will not, because they would just like to keep their money situation open. They'd like to keep their flexibility open, which is one of the big things with all the trade assets that they have from the deals with the Milwaukee Bucks and the Los Angeles Lakers, which we'll talk about later. They have a lot of picks that they could throw around it on a trade market type move, which is what I expect from this team. But then their cap holds, they have a cap hold on Jackson Hayes and Josh Richardson. Richardson was a nice pickup for them at the deadline. I'm just not a big Josh Richardson guy myself, though. To be honest, if they didn't bring back either of these guys, I don't think it would hurt them long term. Now, I could see them realistically keeping both of them. And again, I don't think that's a bad move either, as long as it's around the right price points for the right term. Because I don't think that they need to commit to 4 years of Josh Richardson just with the core that they have currently. But I do think like a 1 year, 2 year deal, I don't have an issue with that. Jackson Hayes, I don't know. I don't think Jackson Hayes is a bad player. In fact, I think he could maybe even start for some of the lesser teams in the league right now. But I just think with New Orleans, like, I just prefer Valanciunas, what he gives them offensively, and I prefer Nance, what he gives them defensively. I know Hayes is extremely athletic, has some phenomenal highlights, but I just think, like, if we're going off of consistency and a guy who's going to give you more on a night-to-night basis, I would just trust those two guys a little bit over Jackson Hayes. And it's not a bad thing. It's not saying Jackson Hayes is a bad player. Again, they've got a lot of bigs, and they've got good, talented bigs, which is a rarity in this league. So Hayes, could see him moving on. I could see his agent being interested in him moving on and getting a bigger role somewhere. So we'll see what happens there. He is a restricted free agent, so potentially they could look to keep him. We'll see exactly how that plays out. So when it comes to free agency for targets, I just don't really think there's a lot of clear targets for this team. You know, I kind of floated some ideas in my head, but I don't know. I just didn't really fall in love with any of them. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time looking at free agency. I have a video of all 202 free agents out there. So I've spent the time, I've thought about all the options, and there's just not a guy out here that I'm like, oh, the Pelicans have to go get him. And because of that, just with the amount of depth that they have, the amount of actual players that are currently on their roster, I think that they're better off just playing free agency pretty quietly, not committing to any deals that they don't need to. And I don't think that they just need to make a big commitment to a veteran who might not even get PT for them. They already have 13 players under contract as well. And remember, that does not count Josh Richardson or Jackson Hayes. So, like, it's just, there's not a lot of open roster spots. Plus, they have a lottery pick this year. It just, to me, seems like they either need to clear house a little bit with a kind of multiplayer trade where they send out 2 or 3 guys for one. That's an upgrade. Or they need to just not make a move in free agency and just hope that continuity and consistency and rolling back with the same team is a benefit for them, because they kind of have a leg up then in terms of, hey, we know our sets, we know our stuff, we're just going to roll this way. That is, I think, an underrated element to basketball and something people don't consider enough. it's always fun to throw players into trade machines and just think, oh, well, this theoretically could happen. But then you realize, oh, this guy doesn't know any of our sets. So when we yell quick 52 zip, they don't know what that means, which is, I think, a funny little side note about trades. But I still do think trading could be in the Pelicans' wings here. And the reason I say that is because they've got all the assets. They've got young guys. We've talked about them at length in this video. Teams would love to have Dyson Daniels. Teams would love to have Herb Jones. Trey Murphy would be like a premium blue chip prospect right now for a team. They've also got those matchable contracts in there with some of those guys making middling money. You think about Nance, you think about Valanciunas. They've got some pieces like that. They've also got tradable draft picks. They've got the Lakers picks. They've got the Bucks picks. They've got their own picks. So they're kind of loaded up here to make some big, and I mean really big splashes if they want to. So let's look at what some of those potential players on the trade block could be that this team would have some interest in. And let's start with the big hitter first. Damian Lillard of the Portland Trailblazers, I would not completely rule out. Obviously, they've already made a trade with Blazers management. They made the trade with the GM over there, Joe Cronin, sending Josh Hart and some picks and some other stuff to go get CJ McCollum and Larry Nance. I think both sides are pretty happy with how that deal went out, especially since the Pelicans ended up flipping Hart for a first-round pick themselves. I think both sides are pretty happy and would be open to renegotiating if Damian Lillard were to demand a trade from the Blazers, which is what would need to happen first for any of this to even come to fruition in any shape or matter, just because realistically, I don't see the Pelicans getting him if he doesn't request a trade. So that's what we're relying on first step, which I don't think is the most likely thing. I think, in fact, Portland's probably going to go in the direction of buying and trying to add to Damian Lillard, and I think that's going to be a mistake for their franchise, but I think that's what they're going to try and do. So let's go down to option 2. Mikal Bridges, Brooklyn Nets. I know the Pelicans would want him. I 100% know it. I just don't think the Nets are really entertaining it. He had such a good end of the season, and I think the Nets and a lot of executives around the league probably believe that the sky is the limit for Mikal Bridges, one of the better defensive players in the league. When I talked about Herb Jones being a top 6 one-on-one defender, possibly, you know, obviously he's got the stocks to do it. He's got all those traits. Mikal Bridges was that. He is that still, I think, in one-on-one moments when he has to lock in, but also now there's a bigger offensive load for him to carry. And he stepped up big time, averaging over 27 points a game for Brooklyn after being traded to the Nets for Kevin Durant. And with the Suns potentially losing in the second round, I think there's going to be some early questions about what that looks like long-term for Phoenix, which I said that at the trade deadline. I said, look, if they win a championship, it's all cool, but there's a lot of potential long-term downfall here. And I don't think that's a crazy thing to understand. They traded for a guy well into his 30s when one of their top 3 players before him was 37, 38-ish years old, and Chris Paul, who's hurt again with a hamstring. Obviously, things can happen, and Durant's so good that you can justify it. But they gave up 2 really, really good young players in Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson. The Nets, I feel like, did very well in that trade. I gave them an A+ for that move because I loved their return. Now they're loaded with players, and I don't think that Mikal Bridges is on his way out. That's what I believe. So let's turn to Minnesota, who they made a big trade last summer for Rudy Gobert, one that I was just wrong about. I thought they were going to win a lot more regular season games than they did. Now, Cat missed a significant amount of time. D'Angelo Russell just did not play very well in Minnesota at all, consistently turned the ball over, and I think that was a big reason as to why their season ended the way that it did and just kind of played out the way that it did. Obviously, D'Lo got traded for Conley, but now Conley has to learn a whole new system, whole new set of teammates outside of Gobert. He's adjusted to that. I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker was also a nice get for Minnesota. But ultimately, the big question now is, does Tim Connolly and the Minnesota Timberwolves look to recoup assets? And Karl Anthony Towns would be their big swing to do so. Are they going to try and reset the table for themselves around Anthony Edwards? Because I do think Rudy Gobert is a very good fit onto that roster. In terms of Ant and McDaniels and some of the other pieces that they have. So you might say, okay, are they willing to trade Cat? And if they are, would the Pelicans have interest? Because he is a really good player. If I'm New Orleans, I'm staying, to be honest, a long ways away from Karl Anthony Towns. I just would not have any interest in making a move like that. But I think it's a legitimate question, and I think a lot of Pelicans fans would like to have him. Cat is a fantastically talented player. There's just something about him. Defensively, he doesn't know how to play in a stance. That's the first issue. And then just the play style, a perimeter shooting big. Not that you can't win that way, but people are going to reference Dirk Nowitzki. Dirk Nowitzki played massively differently, like in a massive difference in terms of the way that he actually played. Dirk Nowitzki drove the ball a lot, which Cat can do, but Dirk Nowitzki also settled in the mid-range a lot. Cat does not do that. He has the skill set to do that, in my opinion, but he just doesn't do it. He's never really applied a true post fadeaway. He's kind of inconsistent at it when he does shoot it, and I just think it comes down to the fact that he doesn't have the reps there. So for me, I'm kind of out on Cat if I'm New Orleans. I just don't think he really fits the team. Now, they have the defensive players around to get something like that done, that maybe Cat would fit in decently there as like a big, because you have all this length and size. But realistically, if I'm Minnesota, I'm asking for probably Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and more, which probably it's kind of tough for me to stomach that if I'm New Orleans. And then OG Anunoby, he's really the big player I think New Orleans would look to make the move for, because he's a better offensive player than a guy like Herb Jones. And if they could swing a deal for him that makes some sense, taking that step forward would be a really nice move just in general, just because they need to add a player who I think is a little bit more ready. Now, if it's at the cost of Trey Murphy and a bunch of picks and Herb Jones, I'm just kind of out on that too, because I think ultimately Trey Murphy can grow into an OG Anunoby-esque player. And because of that, I wouldn't trade him for OG Anunoby. Even though, yes, it accelerates your timeline, do you really need to accelerate the timeline around Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson? I don't think you do, but I think that they'll look into it for sure. And I wouldn't be shocked if at the end of the offseason, if OG Anunoby's on a different team. I think the Pelicans are one of the 3 most likely teams to land him this offseason. So when it comes to an early outlook, again, a lot could change this offseason. It really comes down to who they draft, what they do with that draft pick, because they could potentially trade it on draft night. They also have the potential of making a big move. If they make that big move and it's OG Anunoby, they're going to probably be a 48 to 50 win team next season, assuming some level of health, at least more health than they had this year. And I think just continued continuity. Hopefully they understand, like, hey, we have to take every regular season game serious. We have to try and play in as many as we possibly can, even through some general soreness, which I know CJ McCollum was doing at the end of the year. They need to, because at some point it's always going to be what if they're healthy, kind of like what we've said with the Clippers here. But this team's younger. They need to be out on the court. They need to play more games. And if they do that, and if they can get healthy, stay healthy, this team's going to be a real force. They really will be. Am I buying stock into that yet? Don't ask me today. I can't commit to saying yes, but I also don't want to commit to saying no, because I feel like I've been glowing about the talent on this team. Pelicans fans, you got to feel pretty happy, because I've been very, very positive about this team, which in some of these offseason previews lately, I've been like, I don't really know about this. I don't really like this. I don't like that. Pelicans, I've been saying, wow, this player's great. They've got this, they have everything. I like the Pelicans roster. I like their coach. I think for the most part, they're in a really, really strong commanding position. I just don't want them to screw it up, make a big trade that they didn't need to make. I don't want them to rush into things, but at the same time, I just need to see them play. And if they do, they're going to be really good. But as long as they keep missing time, there's going to be questions about, do you trade Zion Williamson? My answer to that is no. His value is at the absolute minimum right now. And if you're the GM that trades Zion Williamson and he ends up at some point figuring out how to stay healthy and stay on the court, you look like a complete buffoon, because you traded away one of the top 15, 20 players in the world at minimum. It just, you're not going to get the return on value that you need, the return on investment, the ROI. And at the same time, if you keep him, like, no one's going to blame you for doing that, which is why if I was the GM, if I was the decision maker there, I would say, yeah, no, I'm not trading him, because nobody's going to blame me for not trading Zion Williamson. The name brand alone gives you permission to not ever trade him. And I just think that's a little ridiculous. Of course, people on TV need something to sell every day. So they come up with these weird narratives, weird storylines. The Pelicans are not looking into trading Zion Williamson, not this offseason. It'd be probably at most like next offseason at the very earliest, if, again, we have another season where Zion just doesn't play and misses all of these games, misses postseason time. Like, then I think they'd start to consider it a little bit more, because then it's a 3-year stretch of it. But it's way too soon for that, just with when he signed his deal, his extension, with where we're currently at. New Orleans is not going to look to trade him right now. I do like this team's long-term outlook. I like the early outlook too for next season. It's just about being healthy. And I hope that they can do that because I love watching this team. I think they've got a lot of talent, a lot of length, a lot of size, a lot of everything I would want to have if I was a GM and a coach in this league. So I think that they're in a really strong commanding position going forward. Huge thank you to everyone who has watched this video. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, turn on that notification bell so you don't miss out on future uploads. I've been really loving doing these offseason previews. I hope you've enjoyed them as much as I have, because it's just been a huge thrill to cover every single team in the league for the most part. We've gone through, I think, like 16, 17 of them almost at this point. So it's just been massive amounts of coverage here on the channel. Been mass recording a lot of these videos and putting a lot of work and time into it. So again, a like goes a long way and let me know I'm doing a good job. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to comment. Do you like the Pelicans name or not? Let me know down in the comment section. We'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.